Hey Jeff, this is Sam Day. I'm in your class, and the book I chose to read is called The Path Between Us, An Enneagram Journey to Healthy Relationships. Now, I know that you're a big Enneagram nerd, and I am as well. I read The Road Back to You, and now this is just the continuation of that, and it's really, really good. What it isolates specifically is whereas The Road Back to You is focused on your personal journey and finding your number and setting the framework for what the Enneagram is and what it means in the context of yourself and finding yourself and realizing who you are as a person. The path between us looks even further into that and specifically isolates relationships. So instead of isolating what one number means as an individual, it starts to look at what numbers mean in relationships with each other, which I think is really the more interesting aspect of the Enneagram. A lot of people, whenever they look at the Enneagram or relationship books in general or personality tests, what they're looking for is these magical matching types where a 1 matches with a 9 matches with a 7. These things aren't exactly what this book is looking to do, which I think is really good. What it sets up is how these numbers interact with each other, not whether or not one type of relationship is better than another type of relationship, which is really cool. So I'm going to first start off by what the introduction talks about, which lays the framework for what the Enneagram is. This is a really important aspect of what this book sets up, and it really sets the framework for what they go in depth on each individual number and what it means. I'm going to skip a lot of the introduction stuff, what the Enneagram is, because you know what that is, and you can also read The Road Back to You, which will explain that. But one thing that she really points out, which I think is really interesting, is she talks about how her relationship with her husband, she's a 2, which is a helper, and her husband's a 9, which is a peacemaker. And in dealing with her husband and interacting with her husband, she began to realize that there are these unique relationships that develop between people, and that in realizing each other's faults and the way in which they view each other and interact, that can help us learn more about ourselves and then in turn learn more about how we interact in relationships and how those relationships should progress. One of the best quotes she talks about is she talks about how human beings want two things. We all want to belong and we all want to find some sort of meaning. Now, if this isn't what society and what humanity really is, I don't know what is. And it's really what the Enneagram is choosing to delve into. It's trying to find how we belong, how we interact with each other, and how we find meaning. And we can only find meaning through knowing ourselves better. And I think that's backed up by the Bible, and that's really what the Enneagram goes more in depth into. And it was really helpful in reading this book is realizing what it means to be a 9 for me in particular, and what that means when I'm interacting with other people. Now, when I first bought this book, I wasn't in a relationship. Now I am. But I think that it really does a good job of not just focusing on romantic relationships, but also friendships in the way in which 1s interact with 2s, 2s interact with 3s, and each individual numbers. So I'm going to do a little bit on every single number, just a quick overview, because that's what the particular chapter is going to. And honestly, I want to focus a lot on what the 9 is, just because that's interesting to me, if that's okay with you, because I want to make it personal. And so the first chapter, it's really interesting how it goes in order. They go from 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so by starting with 8, they start with the Challenger, which is one of the most highly interactive types. The Challenger is someone who really wants to almost fight in relationships and look for those things. Whereas you move into the 9s, which is the Peacemaker. The Peacemaker, although it's still in that anger triad, is really interesting, and that's what I am, of course. And the peacemakers in relationships really want to avoid conflict at all costs. And so there are certain relationships where they have to deal with conflict and have to face that conflict head on. But a lot of times they're just trying to run away from that. And so 9s in relationships, if it seems like they're trying to run away from the problems, that's just really who they are as human beings. And so it's something that you have to confront, but it's also something that you have to realize is just part of them as human beings and progressing. What's also really cool about each chapter is that at the very end, it almost has like a cheat sheet of what it means to be this number and how it means to interact. In addition to the 9s, you have the 1s, which are perfectionists, you have 2s, which are helpers, your 3s, which are performers, your 4s are romantics, your 5s are investigators, your 6 are loyalists, your 7s are enthusiasts. All of these numbers, as I rattled them off really quickly, have really in-depth, unique ways of looking at each other and being in relationships. And you can't assume that every human being, regardless of if they're in the same family or regardless if they have the same upbringing or if they're in the same social class, has the same number or the same way of interacting. And that's why this book is really cool, is because it looks at what it means for us as human beings to come together, to be in relationships, to interact with each other. And Suzanne Stable does a good job of isolating why the Enneagram progresses relationships and is healthy. So that's all I have for today. I wanted to look at what the Enneagram means, and this really helped me learn more about myself and hopefully myself in relationships as well. Thanks. See ya.